So I hope you're in the right room. Managing Agile Teams, are you obsolete? Any managers in the room right now? Got a couple? Oh, more than half. All right. Last time I gave this talk was Agile Indy last week, and there was probably 75 managers in the room, and they were very interested in what I had to say.
Very nervous.
Very nervous, yes. So I'll save the punchlines for the end here. But let me start out with a bad manager story. So set the stage here. It's roughly 2007, 2008. There was this whole thing called the Great Recession happening, and I happened to work for a print company when the iPad came out. Yeah, so everybody was a little nervous because this thing was pretty cool. We printed magazines, and so does the iPad. And it was pretty slick. Like it could go like this, and it looked like the pages were turning. It was awesome stuff. Anyway, this didn't look really good for the financials of the company, and they had acquired a few other smaller competitors, but then they bought their second largest one right above them, and they became this $5 billion mega print company. Through that, they started laying off more and more people as they were consolidating, and so every other week you'd see something like 100 more people got their heads chopped, basically. And you knew things were getting bad, especially when it became around the end of the year and no one was getting bonuses or raises or things like that. So not a good time. Little, universal sad-faced icon. I had put in a request to get a laptop. So I needed a Mac. It looked like that back then, plastic and white and whatnot. The reason for it is we built software that our print clients would use for building catalogs. So if you're a Land's End and you're a graphic designer for Land's End, you're going to use InDesign. InDesign will allow you to create all these templates where, Johnny with the shirt, and the price is $49.95, and here's some copy or description about the product. And they're going to do this a lot of times because they sell a lot of shirts and whatever. The problem is for graphic designers is they would have to go in and manually adjust the pricing and manually adjust the copy if just something simple changed, and they have to do this for every single item. So we built a tool that allowed them to pull all that information from a database and link it directly to an InDesign file, and with a push of a button, magic. It just auto updates. We got one person in the room. You'd have been a good customer. So the software itself on the server side ran on a PC, but our clients used Macs. So I needed to be able to demo at a client site the system functioning with their data. And the way I would do that is I needed a Mac, one that could run Parallels, a virtualization platform to run Windows. What I had before that was a really old Mac that was like a PowerPC generation. And then I had to carry this boat anchor PC with me too and have this whole rig set up, and half the time it didn't work. So I asked for a laptop. It's like $1,000. So I submit the request, and maybe about 10 minutes later, my manager comes running over to my desk. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to send that to you, he says. And I'm a little confused. So I look at my email. You guys know what's going to happen next? I look at my email, and there's a joke in there to another one of my bosses, because you have to have two, right? That said, should we take this $1,000 request out of Rob's annual raise? Ha ha. Top that one. Yeah, that's an awful manager story. But what do you guys think? You guys have some awful manager stories? Not that we need to hear them all, but yeah, I've had a lot of crappy bosses. So from a ripe young age, I've been on sort of a crusade. But not all my managers have been terrible. I've had some really good ones. Remember them? Well, I used to work with them. I used to do car audio installation. This was a really fun job. Because you could go in and you could trick out a car and you could make it so loud you'd pretty much have your ears bleeding. This was an awesome time. But I had a boss here who was great. He was not what you'd typically expect from a boss, command and control style. He really engaged the team. He was involved with the team. Really great guy to hang out with. And I mean, he got the job done. He made sure we were focused on being a profitable shop and things like that. But there was just something special about him. So I knew that not all managers had to be terrible. So a little bit about me. By day, I'm a Scrum.org PST and management consultant. Own a little Chicago business here in town. We do Agile transformations and Scrum trainings and things like that. By night, I'm listening to metalcore and fighting bad management. Can you kind of see that? It's supposed to be Daredevil. It's all dark. Yeah, well, we got some of the lights off anyway. So where did my career start? I started out in software development, worked as an engineer for a number of years, and I always knew I wanted to go to business school. So eventually I did. I hit the books. I learned all about management. all about the right ways, all about the wrong ways, all about case studies from different organizations that had it right or didn't have it right, and what they did. I learned a lot about Toyota, too. And then I discovered Scrum. Scrum for managers. Through Scrum, I realized, hey, wow, all these great ideas in modern management are exemplified here in Scrum. And I really got it. I could see the two, and I found my calling. So I've read a lot about operations management as prescribed by Toyota from the 1950s and kind of have seen how that has evolved into modern software development frameworks and ideas. Good stuff. But now I've got a question for you. Now, we've got a few scenarios here. Can you guys see this okay? All right. We've got a stock trader, head of a stock trading company. We've got the weatherman. We've got a software development manager. And we've got a gardener. And the question is, what do these people have in common? If you have any idea, just shout it out. It's a hard question.
Foresight.
They have foresight. Okay. Any other ideas? I'll answer the question eventually. Just want to see if you could tell at this point. All right, let's take a step back. Let's think about complex adaptive systems. You probably have heard this a lot at Agile conferences. Anyone ever not heard of a complex adaptive system? Really? Okay, great. So let's just start with this. This is our galaxy. This is the Milky Way. And I don't know how you took a picture of the entire galaxy because we haven't even gotten stuff much past our solar system. But apparently we are there. This is pretty crazy. There's all kinds of stars floating around, all kinds of planets, and the gravity's influencing one another, and it's like this big game of pinball. Here's some really interesting stuff. So the Milky Way has 100,000 million stars. That's the Milky Way. There are 100 billion observable galaxies in the universe, at least what we know of the universe. And from that, apparently there are this many Earth-like, or believed to be Earth-like planets. That's 22 zeros. 5 and 22 zeros. I believe the number is 50 sextillion. That's a lot of Earth-like planets. So it kind of makes us feel small and part of this huge complex structure. But let's talk about complex adaptive systems a little. They're dynamic. Their networks, or the sum of all of their interactions cannot be, it's not exactly additive. It's not like putting a bunch of numbers together and you can predict an outcome. They operate differently. They're adaptive, so they change based on their surroundings. They adapt to their environments. Here are some common examples. The human brain, it's a very, very complex system. We're just figuring out how certain things work. Like, wow, if I cut somebody's skull open and I push there, they don't know the English language anymore. That's pretty cool.
Because cutting skulls open is cool.
On live people while they're awake. Because you have to be awake to know if they know English anymore, right? I don't know how you work in that field. This is a swarm of people, a crowd. You guys ever hear of mob mentality? Yeah, you get enough people riled up and they're kind of about as smart as the dumbest of all of them, collectively. But they can take on a life of their own. And it's not necessarily each individual is adding to this, but as a collective, they become something else. Here we go, the immune system. Another complex system. You affect one part of it, it may have an effect on another, but as a system, it's self-healing. It adapts. Most times when you go to the doctor, I heard their trick is 80% of problems actually solve themselves. So they'll usually say, take 2 of these and call me in the morning. That's their way of saying this will probably work itself out in the morning, and if it doesn't, then we'll dig into it. But 90% of the time, it works itself out. Here's one I always like to look at, the stock market. Right? The stock market is pretty complex. There's a lot of players, a lot of investors, a lot of companies, a lot of things going on. I hear, Trump the other day, whatever he said caused the stock market to drop 330 points. All right. There's a whole bunch of people with erratic behavior that decided to sell, and all of a sudden the stock market goes shooting down. What can we do about all this? What can we learn from all of this? So let's feed this information back into here. What do these people have in common? They'll have brains. I totally agree with you. Well, one of them, arguably.
They're all interacting with complex adaptive systems.
They're all interacting with complex adaptive systems, absolutely. They don't directly produce the output, yet they are accountable. And 2 legally can work with their environments and manipulate them, and 2 really can't. Haha, Wolf of Wall Street. That's all right. It's after lunch. You get a pass. Let's talk about how all this started with the management talk. So traditional project teams look a little like this, right? You've got a bunch of cubes in a farm, and this farm goes like 16 miles. You ever work in one where there were no windows? Anybody? Yeah, that was that place where I asked for the $1,000 laptop. No windows anywhere, just miles of cubes. So it's pretty awful. But to get any work done, you have to coordinate the efforts between a person sitting in that cube and a person sitting in that cube and one over there, and maybe someone from another building. This is non-trivial. It's very complicated, especially when all of these different people are on other projects too, thus requiring project managers. Any project managers in the room? Former? Recovering? Just kidding. Former? Okay. So it's a hard job. It's extremely hard. So you need a smart person who's constantly keeping in touch with all of these different people and wrangling all these things and managing these resources to try to hit a date. We've only got so much money, and I've only got so many people to work with. It's a really, 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 really hard job. Now we have Agile teams. We have these groups of people that are sitting close together, typically, in an ideal state anyway. They're working in close collaboration. They're delivering in small batches. They're baking quality in from the beginning, so the things that they produce are finished and ready to be used. It flips traditional management kind of on its head, doesn't it? How do you manage a team that doesn't really require the same type of management anymore? That's kind of what got me to this talk. So, any thoughts? How do you manage a team that doesn't need direct management?
Well, in this case, it sounds like management is being used to talk about the coordination, right? The coordination that was required in that cube farm, whereas beyond the coordination side, there's other aspects of management, people management, maneuvering organizations, all those kind of things that still exist, and but you still have teams that are generally role-based, and so folks aren't necessarily honing in on those particular roles. Still an opportunity to add value.
Absolutely. I'm definitely here to say managers can still add value. I don't want anyone here to think that Rob said fire all managers, because that's exactly why I created this talk. I don't agree with that philosophy. But I do agree with the philosophy that if you don't need a coordination manager or you don't need a task manager, somebody to say, Johnny, I need you to do X and I need it by Y. Susie, I need this, I need it by X. If you're not doing those sorts of activities or you're not being the constantly the decider of everything, what do you do? How do you add value? So led me to this book. Anyone ever read it? I keep hearing Manager 3.0, but Management 3.0. What's that?
They are different books.
Different books. All right, so I didn't know that Manager 3.0 exists. I'll have to look at it. Jürgen here, Jürgen Appello, says that when hierarchical management embraces complexity, which we kind of talked about a little earlier, and nonlinear thinking, we arrive at what he calls agile management. So this whole book is filled with all kinds of great ideas, great theory, and great practices on how to manage agile teams. But if you look back to those 4 people that were all managing environments, I would argue the software development manager is not the person you want to imitate. I'm going to have you go ahead and come in on Saturday. Yeah. TPS reports. Could go all day with that movie. Any fans of Silicon Valley? Isn't the same guy who did both? Mike Judge. So the idea here is think more like gardeners as modern managers. How do you create an environment in which your plants can thrive? You can't make a rose grow. You can't make the grass green, but you can influence it by giving it the right water, the right conditions, ensuring the light is just right, not too much, not too little. What about poisonous species? Don't you have to remove those? As a manager, you might have to fire somebody once in a while. Not fun, but if you don't do it, it's going to kill your team. Removing barriers. If you're trying to get your garden to grow and you find that there's some big plastic thing running in the middle of your lawn that your last owners put there for you, You're going to have to remove that barrier so your plants can grow. These are all the things a great manager should be doing. Let's look at influence. So influence, your job is to get things done through other people. And that means you have to be really good at influencing others. Anybody have a formal management training program at their company?
Yeah.
No? Yes?
Yeah.
One person? Two people? Have you been through it as a manager, if you are one of those? That's good. You guys must work for the good companies. The last talk I gave, at least half of them did not have a formal management training program, or at least something that says, here at Company Y, we do it this way, and this is why. They just kind of got thrown into the mix. So the reason influence is really important is because a lot of managers get their jobs because they were great subject matter experts. Like, I'm a great coder, I work 80 hours a week, I know the architecture like the back of my hand, and one day my manager quits, and they look at me because I've been here the longest, and they promote me. Anyone ever hear the Peter Principle? Okay, the idea is that you get promoted to your highest level of incompetence, and that subject matter expert, who wasn't necessarily great with people but knows everything about the tech, now is a people manager. Not always the right fit. The skills they lack, influencing without authority. So they're really good at telling people how things should work and where to go next, but they're not great at encouraging others to do it themselves and to figure it out on their own. So really, really, really powerful tool. But I look at a manager's job at being responsible for selflessly servant-leading others to their, I guess, highest level of greatness. So making magic rainbows come out of their head. So a little story about me. When I got my first manager job, I had a new employee that came on. And we were going to train her up to be an Agile trainer and coach. She was sharp. She was ready to go. She had a lot to learn, but we had an idea of what a good Agile trainer and coach would look like, and we put it together in a checklist. Like, well, they should be like this, they should be like that, they should be the other. I'm thinking, how do I go from point A to point B with this particular individual? Because I can't make them do anything. If they want to be that, they have to get there somehow. But I had an idea of the path, and I'll show you a little bit about that path here in a minute. But I kind of had to make a choice. What kind of a manager did I want to be? Did I want to be that manager I read about in the books, that they're command and control and people disengaged? Do I want to be that manager who had the $1,000 laptop joke? No, I didn't want to be any of these people. I wanted to be a manager that people liked. Didn't necessarily need to be best friends with this individual, but I wanted to be that one from Circuit City. I wanted to be remembered. So, managing or coaching. Here's some ideas about managing. So you might manage somebody. It's really more about telling, directing, using your authority in a lot of cases. You manage spreadsheets, right? You manipulate figures, you manipulate things to get certain outcomes. If you're doing this with people, sure, it might have a time and a place, but overused, this technique can lead to disengaged employees. So the first thing I look for when I come into an organization, I find a bunch of disengaged people and managers sitting around going, well, they should just be empowered. I've empowered them. And it's like, well, it's not quite that simple. If they've been using this technique too much, people check out. And they wait for their boss to make a decision before they do anything because they got, their hands slapped the last time they made a decision on their own. When to apply this technique? When there's task-oriented things that need to be done. Maybe we're coordinating logistics for a conference. There really isn't a lot of time at 8 o'clock this morning to put things together. So somebody might just say, hey, do this. I need that done. Hey, can you go run to room 208 and set up Rob's projector? Nobody did that, damn it. There's a time and a place for this style. But again, overused, it can lead to disengaged employees. What about coaching? So we've probably heard a lot about coaching today, but there's a time and place for that as well. We're looking at exploring and facilitating, maybe partnering on long-term improvements, but overused, your team might become a little frustrated by your lack of direction. So a manager who doesn't help you with anything or give you any answers ever, it's kind of like, well, why are you here? You should know something about what's going on. So apply this when you're trying to grow people, grow teams, and this is the technique that I decided to be more of. And yes, I am technically an Agile coach for a living, so I might have had some confirmation bias, but this was the tool that I focused more on. Like, say, 95% of the time, this was the role I played versus being more of a manager type. A few more models that I've dug up on the interwebs about when to manage and when to coach. So you might want to be more direct in your style. Again, when somebody's new, They're not familiar with the environment. You might say, hey, your computer is over there. Go talk to Susie in HR to find out about our vacation policy. Things like that. You might be more directive in the beginning. But you can very quickly get to a point where you can start delegating authority to this person, especially if you hire them smart. We're all in knowledge work fields. We've probably all got a lot of experience in education. So most of the roles any of us are going to be in, we could probably get in and just have somebody start giving us some power and some authority to make decisions. Developing is a state you get to when somebody's got the experience and they're ready to take it to the next level. So I like this model, except for personally, I like to get to that developed state as fast as I can. I find that people like to be developed. I mean, me personally, my best managers were the ones that took an active interest in my well-being, in my career growth, in presenting new challenges for me all the time. These are the ones that I remembered. But in business, we have to be coaches and managers. We just got to know when to apply which and when to apply it, the circumstances in which to apply them. I dug this quote up from Harvard Business Review. You can't be a great manager if you're not a good coach. What do you guys think of that? True? Okay. Let's talk more about what coaching is. So here's how it's defined, according to the ICF. I guess you guys can probably read that. Kind of hard to read from the side. Does that make sense? Okay. So arguably, this separates highly effective managers from the average ones. Just the fact that you can be a coach, that you can guide somebody and shepherd them to higher levels of greatness will be a competitive advantage for you. That influence tool, I talked about it earlier. You're going to also have to be good at influencing without authority for this to work. You can't make somebody be better, but you can guide them there if you influence them appropriately. And by the way, that tool also helps you kind of grease the skids for other areas of the organization when you're trying to remove those roadblocks. If you have a good network within your organization, it sure helps. And you need influence without authority to be able to get your peers to do what you need them to do to sort of manage up in the organization. You must understand what drives the people you're working with. It means you have to understand them. You probably have to have a good personal relationship with them. So this is tough to do in the beginning. When let's say you inherit a team. You didn't choose them. These aren't your friends. You walk into a new situation. The first thing they go is, oh, great, another manager. I've had 4 this year. Okay, what are you going to do with that? The first thing you might want to do is start understanding the people you're working with, the people as humans, not as the machines that fit into some giant organization. So having good conversations, building a relationship, building trust, is really important to be able to kick off a coaching relationship. You also kind of have to help build that connection between the work that they're doing and the mission of the organization. So in Scrum land, product owners have the vision and whatnot. That's just a good idea. Shouldn't everybody understand the vision? So oftentimes it's the job of the manager to help translate that vision into the reality of the work that the people are doing. Sometimes the work sucks. And frankly, it's helpful to understand why we're doing stuff to get you through that point. So this is easy, right? No? Couple things. So regular communication around the development plan is a really, really good idea for coaching. If you're trying to develop an individual and you're trying to get them to the next state in their career, you're going to want to communicate pretty much constantly. Providing timely feedback. This is a really tough one for people, especially if you're bad at giving negative feedback. But who here is good at giving positive feedback? I would like to say everybody should be, but it's hard for some people. To say, you know what, Johnny, you did a great job the other day. Thank you. You really saved my butt. I don't hear enough positive feedback personally. I mean, I know, people, if they're not saying something negative, I assume positive. But you don't know. You don't know if you're doing the right thing unless somebody says you are doing the right thing. Yeah.
What I found with that, even the lack of people just say thank you, it costs nothing, and it goes a long way. Mm-hmm. And I've tried to have managers under me understand that, okay? And yet they don't do it. I don't get it.
A simple thank you.
I don't get it.
Yep. So you ever hear this concept called the emotional bank account? It's kind of a fun model. I deposit, that means I've given you something you want. I withdrawal, probably I did something you didn't want. The idea is that if you can balance that bank account, you'll have a good relationship. I even heard somebody go as far as saying you need to make 7 deposits for every withdrawal, or you'll run that account out of balance. Yeah.
There's been a huge amount of relationship psychological research by John Gottman, Gottman.
Marriage counselor.
Yeah, my partner actually does.
Okay.
And the standard, I believe, is that for every 1 negative interaction, you need to have 7 positive interactions to be on the brink of divorce. So you need 20 positives for every 1 negative to be in a healthy marriage. Now, admittedly, that's a different style of relationship, but there are a lot of very applicable things that span domains.
And boiling it down to just purely human relationships, people-to-people relationships, I think the same applies.
Yes.
If your manager never tells you anything good, but they do tell you when you relate to work and when you mess something up, I don't know if I like my boss. But if every day they're telling me all the right things that I've done and they're honest about it, like they're genuinely saying, hey, I saw that code you just wrote, it's amazing. And then they tell me about it, and they go, I read that for loop, it was incredible. I'm pretty stoked as a developer, right? Look at that amazing for loop. So positive feedback is super important, and it's an easy technique that most people aren't using. Yes, of course, you have to be good at giving negative feedback and giving it in a timely fashion. What is that? Smart feedback, specific, measurable, action-oriented, results-driven, and timely. The T at the end is pretty important. Helping this person learn and grow on an ongoing basis is really important as well. And frankly, most companies aren't doing this. Most companies aren't developing their managers to be coaches. So you can all leave this room and start reading up on that technique and be the superstar managers of your organization. Can I get a selfie with you? Or not a selfie, what do they call photobombing? Yeah.
On negative feedback, do you think you should give it as soon as a situation occurs?
Timely. I mean, that's generic. As soon as possible is good, because if you go, hey, remember like 3 months ago, that time when you called out my mom? I didn't like that. It's like, I don't remember that happening. It's how the facts get distorted over time.
And I've read conflicting views on this. It's like you want to give the person time to, rethink the situation or correct his own action. And I'm thinking, if it impacts a customer, I have to talk to that person right away. And it's negative feedback, obviously.
So I'm missing, I guess, the root of the question here. Are you saying there are times where it's best to let that marinate a little bit before you give the negative feedback?
I always give it right away, okay? But I've read conflicting things, like different management styles.
I haven't read anything that would suggest you should wait, but I just haven't read anything to that effect.
I mean, the only piece I would add to it is as soon as they're ready to take it. Right?
Yeah.
So sometimes if the situation was that big and they're not hearing anything you're talking about too.
Yep.
So especially, I think what you're talking about sounds like they know they did something wrong.
Yeah.
Right? It blew up a customer, it blew up whatever, they know.
Yep.
So it's when are they ready to tell them and reflect on how to change themselves.
And an important part about feedback is you have to be willing to accept it, right? You have to respect the person giving you the feedback for it to work. So one of the team I was on, my first little management gig, we as a group had built sort of a dynamic where we called it Feedback Friday. And anybody could give feedback about anything, positive or negative. It was typically negative, and it was typically directed at me. we had a dynamic where it was like, all right, it's Feedback Friday. It's, all right, I know, put on the thick skin. What do you got? And they'd let me have it. And I was fine. And we had the same dynamic going both ways. So building up an environment where you can give and receive positive feedback, I'd say, is a first step to even being able to do it. Anyway, good things to think about. And, of course, it's easy. All right, that's great, Rob. How? Usually by this point in the talk, people are sick of all my theory and all my practices. So I figured out a way to help that new employee get to the next stage. How do I get that new person who's hungry to be an amazing Agile trainer and coach? This is what I did. I created a Trello board. Go figure. Rob, the Agile guy, goes and makes a Trello board for somebody's career development. So I made this one up, and I put my name in there. I want to be the best C# technical consultant in the world, and I don't know anything about C#. So my manager sits down and helps me work through this. And what we do is we create this. I just want to jump in that photo, maybe at the end of class. So I created this sort of ordered backlog of things that this individual could do as soon as they get into the company. In this particular example, day one was, what was it? Write a, I can barely see it here. Write a Hello World application. So a common thing when you're learning a programming language is just that basic thing. How do I print Hello World to the screen, to a console, whatever? Then you take it up a notch. Read this book, read this blog, write this program, work on a team, pair program with somebody. And if you're in the software development space, this makes sense. For an Agile trainer and coach, the first thing might be, shadow 2 different Agile coaches for 2 weeks. That's a very tactical thing somebody can do. And then what I would do is every week we would talk about what happened. What'd you learn? What'd you experience? How did that go for you? Using that information, I could give her guidance, feedback, learn about what was happening in her day-to-day life in terms of the work, in terms of personal life, and we were building a relationship that was focused on her career development. That was it. Worked really well. And she was hungry. She just kept knocking through these items, so I had to keep throwing more things on there. And we would change it as I found out more about her. You start to find out what a person's interests are. Like, yeah, I like software, but I really like the front end. Okay, so let's put more front-end activities on your board rather than all the back-end stuff, or vice versa. In her particular case, I think organizational behavior and things like that was more of her interest than, say, all the scaling frameworks. So we put more stuff that was interesting to her in that regard on the board. So on the right-hand side, what I usually will do is put a list of goals so that you can always see the work lines up with the goals. And if at any point they're out of line, you can kind of call it out. And of course, establishing a WIP limit, because if you're reading 6 books at once, you're probably not finishing any of them. Anybody ever tried something like this? Now notice, there are no 30, 60, or 90 goals. We've got one? You tried this?
Yeah, for school.
Really?
Yeah, we use Trello at school.
You use Trello at school. Do you use it for learning? For goal setting?
For goal setting.
I'm like 20, 30 years behind. You want to talk about it? That's awesome.
Or he's 20, 30 years ahead.
20,
Nothing about you being behind.
you're ahead of your time. That's awesome. So in the future, we're going to all be obsolete, and we'll be using Trello boards.
Yeah, we use this. Well, we used it as a continuous improvement board for our Scrum teams, for all of our Scrum teams in our area.
Yeah, that's great. Continuous improvement board. I mean, it's just really taking an idea we're all using all day long, how to get work done, how to build up a product, to how to build up a person. I love this thing. I've used it with tons of different people. But there are some assumptions, and those assumptions are you've got a good relationship with that person, or that board is useless. There's an assumption that that person wants to do what it is that's on that board. If they don't want to do it, they're not going to make any progress. And you can't force somebody to get better at something. You can encourage it. You can't make that flower grow. You got to create that environment and work to remove the things that are preventing its growth. So I've had a lot of success with this. I've worked with several Agile coaches and trainers on this. I've worked with, who else? Some managers at my clients. I've put these up where I've discovered, oh, you're a manager and your company didn't have any formal management program. So we'd have activities on there typically around reading specific books. I led a manager book club using a similar concept where we would hit books in order. And as I learned more about their organization, we would change the backlog. Just depending on those managers, what they needed to hear at that time and what was sort of forefront in their problems. But it hasn't all been super spectacular. I've had some challenges. Those challenges were typically around individuals who maybe had a lack of motivation, or the tactics that I tried to employ just weren't working for them. Like if you're not a book reader, I can put a great book on there, you're just never going to read it. That's kind of sad, but okay, fine. So what I did was, to overcome that, try to find some blog posts, maybe a YouTube video, or something. I mean, it was a little bit more work for me because I had to try to pre-vet all these sources that weren't, right from the horse's mouth type of stuff. But I can remember a particular Scrum Master I was working with at a client that I had this trouble with. He just, every week we would talk, and he wanted to do it, but he just didn't want to do the reading. And so I kind of asked, well, what could I do to make this easier? Suggestion he had was, can you just give me the chapters, and I'll read maybe a chapter here or a chapter there? Sure. All right, start here. Read chapter 10 of XYZ book, and let's talk about it in a week. The mechanics of it were pretty simple. We had a shared Trello board. We could both add or change it. It was up to them to move things in progress. And then we just met on a regular cadence, whether that be once a week, once every 2 weeks, whatever sort of fit the situation. That does look challenging. Like if I were a fish jumping from bowl to bowl, I don't even know how you take that picture, but I'm sure it's been cleverly photoshopped. So if you're a manager, I mean, I'd really like for you to think about being more like a gardener than one of these bad managers. Anybody here a bad manager? We got one?
A long time ago.
You were a bad manager. Well, you're not a bad manager anymore?
No. Now I coach instead.
Now you coach instead. Well, I was a bad developer, so now I coach instead. It wasn't so much I was a bad developer. I think I just, the culture of software engineering where I was just not as friendly as I expected it to be. But let's see. There's just one more thing here. The last time I gave this talk, you like that?
Very subtle.
It's like Columbo. Let's see if somebody gets this one. Just one more thing. How is this different than managing traditional teams? If you're a waterfall manager or you work in a command and control structure, how is any of this any different? Could you apply these tools in that environment as well? Yes, this is just about being a good manager. It's not about being agile at all.